Hello, friends. Today I want to compare residence permits through employment with residence permits through starting a company. Let's say we look at all the pros and cons. And for that, we'll need my computer and Excel. So, friends, I've already filled out this kind of table. Now we'll quickly fill it out together. All right, let's get started. The right to a residence permit exists in both options. That is, regardless of whether you get a residence permit through employment or through starting a company, you can apply for a residence permit for all family members. The only thing is there's one nuance when obtaining a residence permit through employment, but when obtaining a residence permit through a company, there is no such nuance. In this case, you can definitely apply for all family members. However, with a residence permit through employment, that's not always the case. There are basically two types of residence permits through employment, annual and seasonal. Which one you can get depends on the availability of a quota. There are quotas for seasonal permits, well, almost always, but they run out quickly. Annual quotas can run out. If you get an annual residence permit through employment, then you can register all family members without any problems. If you only get a seasonal residence permit, it does not give you the right to apply for residence permits for your family members. So for yourself, yes, but not for your family members. With a company-based residence permit, you can always apply for all family members. So that's the only nuance. All right. The right to permanent residency after 5 years. With a residence permit based on employment, you cannot transition to permanent residency. Why? Because you can only renew a work-based residence permit a limited number of times. That is, every 3 years you will have a break in your residence permit. Accordingly, you cannot obtain permanent residency. So in this case, every 3 years you will need to leave, for example, to neighboring Bosnia, then come back and apply for a new residence permit. That's it. So it turns out you will have a break every 3 years. With a company-based residence permit, there is no break. So after living in Montenegro for 5 years, you can obtain permanent residency. Let me remind you, permanent residency PR is the right to permanent residence, which should not be confused with the residence permit RP. And if you want to know how to obtain PR, I have a detailed video about this on my channel. But in short, you need to live in Montenegro for 5 years without any interruption in your RP status. So accordingly, this is not possible through employment, but it is possible through a company. So the right to work in Montenegro exists in both options, but with some nuances, which I will explain now. Here, it's worth making a few clarifications. So let me explain the situation. If you get a job with a residence permit based on employment, you can basically work without any issues. It's a normal legal arrangement, but you can only work for the employer who sponsored your residence permit. That is, you found a job at the company Horns and Hooves for a specific position, and you get your residence permit based on that vacancy. If for some reason things don't work out with your employer, you quit, your residence permit is terminated, you find another employer, and then you apply for a new residence permit. With a residence permit through your own company, things are a bit different. Officially, a residence permit obtained on the basis of opening your own company does not grant you the right to work in Montenegro. Nevertheless, people do work. This practice is widespread everywhere. How do they do it? A contract is signed between two companies, that is, between your company and the employer's company. And according to this contract, your company sends, for example, a consultant to work at that company. Accordingly, you sit in the store and advise customers, or perform some other kind of work. How correct or legal this is, to be honest, no one in the country really knows. But it is widespread everywhere. Although I can't provide any references to the laws, I actually looked for them at some point, but couldn't find any mention anywhere. Formally, you aren't really breaking any rules here. This is widespread everywhere. I've never heard of anyone being punished for this. So if you have a residence permit obtained through a company, then if you break off contact with your employer, you don't lose your residence permit, you just find a new job, sign new contracts, and continue working. That's it. But the only downside is that not all employers want to hire under these conditions. The main reason is what I mentioned right away. No one really knows how legitimate this is. That's why it's a bit harder to find a job this way. Nevertheless, everyone who wants to work under this scheme, they all do. I have several clients who obtained the residence permit on the basis of opening a company, but work in places like these. Among them, there are people who work legally, that is, according to the scheme I just described. In other words, they sign contracts and go to work every day. Inspections come and they say, yes, here is the contract. Okay, that's it. There are people who work illegally. Naturally, you can't just work illegally anywhere, because if there's an inspection, you'll get in serious trouble. But there are certain jobs where you can work illegally, and people take advantage of that. This mostly applies to jobs that involve cleaning or washing something. So, for example, there's an employer who owns a complex of apartments, let's say, I don't know, maybe 8 apartments at the summer house. He rents them out to tourists and hires someone to work illegally. And it's not even necessarily because someone doesn't have the right to work. It's not just about that. All of them, all employers who own apartment complexes generally don't bother with official employment just to avoid paying taxes. They always just hire people illegally. There are never any inspections at places like that. So people who are willing and want to do cleaning or washing in an apartment complex, well, I think they all work illegally. And accordingly, those who open companies do the same. Sometimes they also get jobs at such places. I have 3 clients who are currently working like this. Let's move on. Let's get back to my computer. So let's continue. Naturally, you do not have the right to run a business if you get a residence permit through employment. When opening a company, of course, you do have that right. But free healthcare, kindergarten, and school are available in all of these options. Let's just copy that. Yes, there is free healthcare is provided for all family members, kindergarten for the child, and public school, which is also free for all children. Well, the main point is that, as you can see, official employment has some very serious drawbacks. That is precisely why there are very few workers from Russia or Ukraine who obtain a residence permit through employment. Although they do exist, there are practically only a handful of them here. There are a lot of workers who get a residence permit through employment from neighboring countries, from Bosnia, Serbia. So why is that? I think it's because basically Serbs, for example, don't really have a strong need to strive for Montenegrin permanent residency or Montenegrin citizenship. They have Serbian citizenship, and maybe it's a little bit less advantageous than Montenegrin citizenship, but honestly, not by much. In general, Serbia is also quite a decent country. Sooner or later, it will also be in the European Union. Yes, later than Montenegro, but still, eventually it will happen. And that's why Serbs don't have a real need to pursue Montenegrin citizenship, and I think they aren't particularly eager to do so. But Russians are in a different situation. Most Russians who come to live in Montenegro want to obtain at least permanent residency, but ideally not just permanent residency, but also citizenship in the future. As you just saw in my video, a work-based temporary residence permit cannot be converted into permanent residency, so Russians very rarely apply for a residence permit based on employment. Almost everyone who lives here obtains a residence permit, depending on their personal situation and plans, either through property ownership or by opening a company in Montenegro. The latter option is naturally cheaper and available to most immigrants, which is why it is more common. Well, friends, that's all I have for today. Thank you all for your attention. Goodbye.